Is Precious Achiuwa ready to step in as the full-time backup center for the Knicks? Or could there potentially be some use for him at the power forward still? I get into it right now on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Knicks first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or taking in sights and sounds on YouTube. We appreciate you making us a part of your daily routine. Make sure you hit that auto download function on your favorite podcast app or the notification bell on YouTube so you never miss an episode. I'm Alex Wolf. I'm editor-in-chief and Knicks site The Strickland, which you can find at thestrick.land. And today I am previewing Precious Achiuwa's upcoming season. We're working through our player previews. If you haven't checked it out already, I did the end of bench guys in the first episode. Although the more you'll see when I get into this episode, one of those guys maybe won't be as end of bench. I don't know. The advanced numbers love one end of bench player on the Knicks, and he pairs very well with Precious Achiuwa. But went through the two-way guys as well. Just did Pacom Dadier and Tyler Kolek with my buddy Albert Gim from No Ceilings. So lots of great stuff already. Starting to work our way into the main rotation now, though. So this is exciting. Getting close to the season now. Time to start talking about the main rotation players. And the one I want to talk about today is the last guy that signed on this team out of the people that figure to be in the main rotation, and that's Precious Achiuwa. So last season, he finished his season between Toronto and New York. Obviously, he was part of the OG Anunoby deal. His total stats, 7.6 points, 6.6 rebounds, 1.3 assists, 1.5 stocks per game. That's steals plus blocks. And he had 50.1% field goal percentage, 26.8% from three, and 61.6% from the free throw line as his slash line. For his career, pretty similar, 7.8 points, almost spot on there, 5.7 rebounds, so about one rebound less than last year, and 1.1 stocks for his career, which is about half less than last year, and one assist, which is just a little less than last year as well. And shot for his career 48.1%, 30.7% from three, and 60.8% from the free throw line. So if you look at it just in a vacuum, seems like last year was sort of the median mark for his career almost. Like it was just very similar to what his career numbers were. He finished with a minus 1.3 on off with the Knicks last year. So that's how many points better or worse the team is with that player off the court versus on per 100 possessions. So the Knicks were 1.3 points worse technically with Precious on the floor versus off over the course of his time with the Knicks last year. But I think that that's a little misleading if you just look at it that way, because they were also still just in terms of what the raw numbers were, they were a +1 per 100 with him on the court, which is basically all you can ask of a bench player. It's just they were 1.3 points better than that as an overall unit. So, when he was not on the floor. So they were still positive with him on the floor. It's just they were more of a positive with him off the floor. But that's what happens. They were a really good team last year. They were a 50-win team. He was a bench player. Some of his minutes were a little weird, with who he was out there with and whatever. So, you kind of take that with a grain of salt, but still, I mean, good to know that ultimately they were a positive with him. So as far as things I wanted to, get into in this episode, I figured first off, may as well highlight his best game or moment of last season, which I think was that Pacers game, big comeback by the Knicks. He ends with 12 points, 16 rebounds, 6 stocks when the Knicks really needed him, and they were decimated by injuries. He had to play, I think, like 44 minutes or something in that game. To me, it was the iconic Precious game. It had the I don't know if everybody remembers this moment, but the moment where he had a big putback bucket and it was coming down the floor stone faced, and then Isaiah Hartenstein came up to him to like beat on his chest a little bit, and and Precious just lets out this huge scream that got captured on TV, and just a hilarious moment, but also a huge pump up moment for how good he was playing. I think that was the game of the season for Precious. I think that was sort of, he had some good games prior to that, but that was sort of the coming out party for him, for just how good he could be on this team. And I think a lot of people, myself included, wondered, like, can he give you the defensive rim protection, the stocks that you need, the overall, defensive presence? And came out and played like 44 minutes, mostly at center in that game, and just killed it. And I think that was the moment where you sort of visualize where now you can talk about in this preseason, or this offseason leading up to the preseason, like, yeah, this guy could be the backup center, because I think that he has the juice enough to deter people in the paint, to get those rebounds, to get those offensive rebounds that Tibbs loves. I think of those 16 rebounds that he got in that game, it was like 8 and 8, 8 offensive, 8 defensive. Like, those are all the things you love to see, out of a center in a Tibbs system. And so I think that he really proved himself in that game. And an interesting stat for him. So this is my next category. Interesting stat here. I think that there's something to be said here, maybe with his passing. And, this is something that the Knicks are going to miss a lot, going from Isaiah Hartenstein to then Mitchell Robinson and Precious Achiuwa, was the passing that Hartenstein offered. He was so important with the ball, either up above the three-point line or at the top of the key. He would get the ball and then make short roll passes, or just make really great passes where, he would come up, go to like set a screen for Brunson or whatever, but then sometimes would get the ball handed to him, and from the top of the 3-point line would be able to spot a cutter. Like, he loved Deuce in that scenario. I think he and Bogdanovich weirdly developed a little bit of chemistry that way. He would hit OG that way sometimes. He had really good vision for those sort of passes. And I wonder if there's maybe something a little untapped there with Precious this year, because Precious's assist percentage went from 14.5% in Toronto last year to just 6.2% in New York. So it makes me kind of curious to go back and maybe see what he was doing differently in Toronto. But he was clearly tasked a lot more with playmaking there in a tangible way. I don't think that he was in as much of a role there. I think there's a reason why he kind of just got thrown in the Anunoby deal. I think they were sort of out on him in many ways. Like, I don't think that they viewed him as like a piece of the future. I think it's obvious the Knicks aren't necessarily there yet either, because of the inconsistencies and whatever, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I think that he was playing a little more of a loose role in Toronto and allowed to cook a little more, which maybe allowed him to make those assists more often, versus New York, where he was just kind of typecast into a very Mitch type role, of just like get rebounds, get putbacks, get stuff around the hoop. But we did see, like, he does have some ability, like, from the perimeter. Every once in a while, he'll get hot from the corners. I don't know if that's ever a thing that's going to become consistent for him, but he'll get hot from the corners, shooting the three every once in a while. He can get the ball on the perimeter and put the ball on the floor and drive. He has enough of like a handle and enough of a grasp to do that. And I think that he can pass a little bit. And what was good was, so, again, that huge dip off of 8% from Toronto to New York in assist percentage, his turnover percentage was actually lower in Toronto versus New York. So he had a 14.1% turnover percentage with the Knicks versus 13.3% with Toronto. So that's enough of a small margin that you can say, well, that, whatever, that's probably just what his turnover percentage is. But considering he was passing more in Toronto, I think it's maybe worth exploring, like, hey, if he's going to just turn the ball over sometimes regardless, whether he's dribbling the ball, whether he's inside and gets stripped, or whether he's trying to make a pass, why not try to let him make some passes and, see if he can fill that I heart role just a little bit in that way, and let you have a center out there that can make those plays. So that was an interesting stat to me. I think that that's something worth exploring for the Knicks this year. But I have a big question, which is whether Precious should actually play all of his minutes at center. And I really thought that he should before I started looking into the numbers, and now I'm not quite so sure. So I'll be back in just a second to talk about that, and how one other Nick that I've sort of written off a lot maybe changes the equation a little bit, as far as what Precious's role could be this year, and whether he could actually see some time as the backup power forward a little bit too, which is not something that I thought was necessarily going to happen. So I'll talk about that in just a sec. But first, I got to let you know about our good friends over at FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We have something a little different for you now through September 22nd. Coming up soon, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. And there's plenty of great football action to bet on. But, I just went to a Mets game last night. I got to watch a 9-run half inning. That was pretty fun. And it's got me feeling a little type of way about the Mets at plus 3,000 to win the title this year. Now, if you're a Yankees fan too, they got them at plus 450 if you're a big believer. But, I'm a Mets fan. I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say I think maybe they've got a shot. So plus 3,000. Solid odds. Give yourself, if you're a Mets fan like me, give yourself a little extra incentive to be rooting for that playoff push this year and see if maybe they can make some magic and win their first title in 30 something years. Or is it 40 years? Oh my goodness, man. So much time. Anyway, if you want to do that and to get in on that NFL offer, just visit fanduel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, and I'm back in to keep talking through Precious Achiuwa and his big season coming up. I think this is pretty big for him, for the Knicks. I mean, they're trusting him with a pretty big role here. He himself, I mean, obviously was probably hoping to get a little more than just a 1-year, $5 million deal this offseason, but that's ultimately where he and the Knicks settled. And I think to say settled is probably, I mean, it's unfair to Precious because I think that he is a good NBA player, but I think that is what ultimately happened. I think the reason the Knicks waited so long to sign him was because they were trying to work a sign and trade to get Precious out to bring someone else in, whether it was Walker Kessler or Nick Richards, something like that. One of the names that the Knicks were linked to as far as a backup center. I think none of that came together, which is ultimately what led to this, this marriage taking place. But I had a big question for this year, and this wasn't actually going to be my question until I started looking at the stats, and then I was like, man, maybe this is more of a debate than we think. So my question here is: does Precious take his minutes purely at center this year, or is Tibbs still going to try to work him in at power forward? And we saw a number of times, and it was mostly post Randall injury. And when there was, other players injured as well, where Precious had to step in as the starting power forward a few times. And, I think that it sort of worked a little bit, but there were other parts where you were like, oh, man, like this is, probably not ideal. But the numbers actually say it was quite good. If you look at it, and that's what sort of caught my eye here when I was looking at lineup data for Precious. So, according to Basketball Reference, first off, last year Precious took 36% of his minutes at center with the Knicks and 63% at power forward, and that was after playing 97% of his time at center in Toronto. So clearly they had zeroed in on like this guy's a center. But the Knicks sort of split it a little bit, and actually it was a more equitable split to the power forward position than the center position. So then I started looking and I was like, well, how did he perform in those power forward minutes? And honestly, the team was pretty damn good with him at power forward. So let's just throw a few lineup data things at you here. So first off, in 115 possessions with Jalen Brunson, Dante DiVincenzo, and Josh Hart, plus Jericho Sims last year, that lineup was 20 points per 100 possessions better than opponents. So that's really good. That's a great number. I mean, if you're anywhere in the positive, that's good, but 20 points per 100 possessions is crazy. So then if you take Brunson out for Deuce McBride, which is a lineup that could definitely be on the table because Dante DiVincenzo and Josh Hart aren't going to be starting this year unless there's injuries or unless there's a huge surprise regarding Mikal Bridges, but I don't think that's going to be the case. So you're going to have Dante DiVincenzo and Josh Hart coming off the bench. You're definitely having Deuce McBride coming off the bench. So that same lineup where you had Devo at the 2, Hart at the 3, and Sims at the 5, but then with Deuce in as the point guard, that was 22.2 points better per 100. And that lineup had like I think like 75, 76 possessions, something like that to their name. So again, not a ton of data to go off of, but something to suggest that it was good. And then if you swap out the Nova trio entirely for Deuce, Alec Burks, and Bojan Bogdanovic, and then still kept Sims out there with Precious at power forward, that lineup was 18 points better per 100 possessions, and they played 34 possessions together. So Precious and Sims ultimately last year played 385 total possessions together last year. And of the lineups that they played in that had at least 20 possessions together, which I think there was 6 or 7 of them, only one of them was a slight negative, which was Jalen Brunson, Alec Burks, Josh Hart, Precious, and Sims at minus 1.9. And they played about 20 possessions together. But other than that, the low watermark was 18 points per 100 possessions better. And generally across the board, it was somewhere between like 18 and like 24 points per possession or points per 100 possessions better with Sims and Precious out there with lineups that they played a decent amount of possessions with, again, like 20 or more. So that's sort of, it struck me a little bit. I don't know. I feel like I'm in real time turning around on Jericho Sims a little bit this offseason. I was really not sold on him. Going into this offseason, I was ready to say, like, I think the Knicks maybe are maybe it's time to part ways, or, maybe he's just not that good, whatever. But when I was doing the Sims preview, I looked at some numbers and it seemed like he was a pretty big positive for the Knicks last year. And his rim defense numbers were better than I thought that they were. Perhaps the key to that is having him out there with Precious, who can also provide some of that rim protection, even if neither of them provide shooting. I guess the key there is that Deuce and DiVincenzo and not really Hart. So that kind of throws a wrench in it too. So I can't quite figure out how they had enough shooting on the floor to be that much better, but maybe it's just that they're all capable of running. Precious certainly can run in transition. Josh Hart, that's like his bread and butter. Then to have, trailers and Deuce and Devo that can hit those 3-pointers. Maybe that was just the key, but I'm honestly pretty impressed with what the numbers were with Precious and Sims out there. And more now I'm thinking like, maybe, I know everybody is super excited. The fact that Tibbs said, finally on the record the other day, like, I'll play Julius Randle at the 5 potentially to make up for the loss of Hartenstein. And that all sounds great, but maybe there's something to this sort of too big lineup with Precious and Jericho Sims out there. And maybe that's something that Nick should experiment a bit with, or particularly, when there's opportune times for it. If you're up big early on and you want to just try it out and see if things are working, or if you're up big late and you want to just throw it out there in garbage time a little bit and let them get some run and see if things are working. But the numbers suggest that it was pretty good last year. So I don't know. Again, I'm kind of reconsidering things a little bit here, because I think I think Sims actually kind of has the juice a little bit as far as what his numbers look like. So we'll see what ends up happening. But that was my big question for the year. Does Precious take his minutes purely at center? I'm going to go ahead and preemptively answer and say probably not, because I think there's some data to suggest that he's good out there at power forward with Jericho Sims, or, I guess we'll see what could possibly happen if he's out there with Mitchell Robinson as the power forward. I get the feeling maybe that wouldn't work quite as well, because things wouldn't be as switchable and all that. But there's some real intrigue to what could be done with this bench this year. So I'm excited to see how that plays out. But I want to talk about goals for Precious for this year and what my realistic expectation is for him going into the season. So I'll talk about that in just a moment. But first, I got to let you know about our good friends over at Gametime. And Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And I love Gametime. I've been using it a lot recently. Been trying to go to as many Mets games as I can before the end of the season, and just went to one last night. Actually, got to see a great 9-run half inning. That was a ton of fun. And I got to be in the building because of Gametime, because, I was like, I don't want to spend a ton of money. Knicks season's right around the corner. I'm going to be probably buying some tickets for that. I went on there. I looked for great deals. I found awesome seats, like 4th row back in the 300 section, but with a great view down the of the first baseline, and they were like $30 each or something like that for really primo seats in one of the areas that lets you get into all the premium areas up in that part of the stadium. It was fantastic. So I owe that all to Game Time and the fact that they're always really diligent about pointing you to the absolute best deals to get you in the building for whatever you want. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, and I'm back in to finish talking about Precious Achiuwa here and talk about goals and expectations for him this year because that's how this should end, right? So the goal this year, I was trying to think of what I would set for him, and I want to say get the 3-point shot going, but it's kind of tough to realistically say that when you've got 4 years of data suggesting that the 3-point shot just isn't there. Like I think in Precious' mind, he would love to be a 3-point shooter. In the eyes of the Knicks, they would definitely love for him to be a 3-point shooter. In the eyes of fans, certainly everybody would love for him to be a 3-point shooter. He seems like, I mean, he has the ball skills and everything else where you would think like, I don't know, maybe he could develop a shot. Like he's just clearly a skilled player, but I'm starting to wonder if it's going to happen. I don't. I kind of lean towards no. I think he's always just going to be streaky. I think it's going to be one of those cases where you can never really count on it from him. But if you give him the green light and he takes one and he makes it early, maybe he'll get hot and make a couple for you throughout the course of the game. Obviously, we saw even in the playoffs, when he had to come in, he made a big three or two that shifted things for the Knicks. In multiple moments there, and we had some moments during the regular season too where he hit a big three here and there. So I think it might just end up being one of those things where you never want to count on it, but you always be grateful for it if it happens, I guess. But yeah, I think I don't know if I'm banking on him turning into suddenly like a 35% 3-point shooter or something. So I think the main thing would just be consistency. So like pending a trade or something, I think he's going to be the backup center for the Knicks this year. Again, unless they check out the same data that I did in the last segment and say, you know what, let's actually make Jericho Sims the backup center with Precious out there at power forward. Like that seems to work pretty good. But I think the backup center, for the Knicks, that's a really important position to Tibbs. Like he likes to have roughly the same thing from his centers throughout the entire game. He wants rim protection. He wants rebounding. He wants especially offensive rebounding. And he wants you to be able to finish inside. And, I think that Mitch does that. I think that Hartenstein certainly did that plus more, which was what helped make the offense go so well. And maybe Precious can, in his own way, help the Knicks and then some, with the primary objectives plus, I highlighted earlier, like the passing maybe is worth exploring. Certainly him as a power forward may be worth exploring if he's confident enough to put it on the floor consistently from the perimeter and, keep the ball moving and all that. Like maybe there's something there. But I think the main thing is we need to see consistency out of him. There's a reason that Toronto was more or less okay with throwing him in as a throw-in in the Anunoby trade. There's a reason why he didn't really play much with the Knicks at the beginning until he sort of found his stride. And I do give Tibbs credit. Like Tibbs really is like the bigs whisperer. I think that he was able to sort of get through the Precious and give him just a very defined role of that rebounding center, do some rim protection, whatever, like just focus on those few things and things will come to you. And I think that he really bought into that. And that's what led to the good back half of the season for him. But things were rough when he first started with the Knicks, and it's, not necessarily the hardest system, I think, to integrate in. We saw obviously OG Anunoby came in and just started setting history right away with how good his plus minus was and how well he integrated. So, I think there's something to be said that like Precious was not the most consistent player. And we saw that sort of down the stretch of the season too. There were, after that really hot stretch, there were some games where you were kind of scratching your head. And in the playoffs, he didn't really get a ton of playing time either, despite the injuries and everything else. And, I think that he has something to prove as far as proving that he could consistently be a really good NBA player. So I think that's the main thing that I would say for a goal for him. Just try to find that consistency, stick to just the vision of what your role is and do it the best you can. Own that role, do it the best you can. Don't try too much to do too much extra, which, might include shooting too much or putting the ball on the floor too much, or, just generally, not playing the way that Tibbs likes. I think that's the most important thing. If you want to play on a Tibbs team, you got to play exactly how he wants you to play. And if you don't, then you're going to be in trouble. So as far as realistic expectation for this year for Precious, I think he's going to play a pretty solid backup 5 to Mitch. I think that there's a chance that we see him at the 4 and see some minutes there with Sims, from time to time, especially if Randall and Mitch are not able to start the season. That's 100% an alignment that we're going to see at times, early in the season. And maybe it'll prove itself as something that should be explored more off the bench, since both those guys will be bench players that can come in and play together. Or you could separate them from time to time. I would say generally, as that goes, I would probably only want Precious out there most of the time. You know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't necessarily have Sims out there without Precious playing. I would probably think, all right, either Precious is the center or you slot him up to the power forward and put Sims there at center, since they seem to work well together. So I think that Precious is going to have a lot on his plate as far as, what he's going to bring to this team and what he's going to be asked to do. Unfortunately, I do think it's probably likely that if the Knicks do make a midseason trade for someone, looking at like Robert Williams, someone like that, where Portland just has too many centers right now. Robert Williams was injured last year. They might try to just play him enough just to prove like, hey, he's not injured anymore, but we have Ayton, we have Donovan Clingan, like, we're over, we have Dwap Reith, who we just re-signed. Like, we're kind of flush at center right now. So we don't necessarily need Rob Will anymore. The Knicks might look at him and say, well, that's a guy that can really, really give us what Isaiah Hartenstein, was giving us, because his passing is really good. Gets rebounds at a solid rate, just like Hartenstein and Mitch. He's got good stock rates and everything like Mitch. So, that might be a guy that the Knicks look at if he's healthy and say, let's go after that guy. Unfortunately, I think for Precious, if the Knicks do that, then Precious will be the main salary building block there. And then they'll put together whatever they can with, smaller salaries to make that one happen, and make that deal happen for Robert Williams. So, I think if that's the case, then, that would kind of be sad. Like, I like Precious a lot. I like that he's a local kid. I like that he seems to love playing for the Knicks so much, but I don't know if he's a permanent solution. I think one thing that I can say with certainty is that he'll give it his all while he's here. And whether that's this whole season, whether it's beyond this season, whether it's half this season, whatever, like, he'll lay it all out there. He definitely seems to love playing for the Knicks, playing in his home city, for his hometown team and on all that. And he said that as much. So we'll see where the season takes him, but I think he'll be good. I think that things are going to work out with him, and ultimately, whether it leads to him staking enough of a claim that the Knicks don't feel the need to upgrade, or, if he's good but not good enough to potentially be championship level, and that's where the team feels like they are, then, maybe he ends up getting moved. But either way, look forward to seeing whatever the season brings for Precious. And we got more player previews coming up. We got some more guys that are in the rotation towards the end of the rotation. Maybe we'll see about getting a guest or two in here to talk through some of these guys. Gavin will be back after this weekend from his vacation. He's been a little busy moving, and then went on a nice trip. So that's great. And I hope he's having a great time. But we'll be reunited soon, start talking through things as we get closer to the season. But until next time, thank you all for tuning in, and I will talk to you all soon. Peace out.